well, I guess should we start with the iPad Pro?
It's the first thing on the list.
It is the first thing on the list.
So who wrote about this?
Jeff Campman did, who's not here because we have enough people.
Are you going to do your best Jeff impression?
I will try to. Well, this is something that was. Here's my reaction to it. First of all, everybody thought that Apple was doing a bigger iPad, and I was like, okay, but I hadn't really thought through what that meant. And so they introduced it, and it's really thin. It has a new SoC in it, a new chip in it that apparently is a pretty big upgrade over the A8 and A9X that they've had in the prior generation. It's very high resolution, and all of that. Like it's a big iPad in that sense. But then we got to like the presentation, and Microsoft came out on this stage to show Excel, and they also then they did this. They made a Surface. I was shocked.
Yeah.
I was just shocked. I couldn't believe that they built like a type cover. What did they call it? Smart keyboard cover for the iPad. It makes sense, right? And there are things like this kind of sort of for the iPad made by third parties. But the iPad Pro, the big iPad that's 12 whatever inches corner to corner, now has a Surface looking keyboard.
And now it's brilliant, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I kind of thought the Surface was pretty nifty before, but this is, I'm sure there are Apple fans who are like, oh, this is awesome. Nobody thought of this, but I think everybody knows this is the uncharacteristic thing for Apple, right? Everybody knows they followed Microsoft on something, and that's usually not what what happens, right? And then the other thing was they made a stylus for it, which is again a Surface thing, right? The Surface is used by artists and stuff to draw different pressures sensitive. Like there's a reasonably good ability with the stylus to allow people to do precise sketching and thicker lines by pushing hard, thinner lines by doing lightly. Now we got that with the iPad too. And Ben, what did you think of the name of the stylus? The
Apple Pencil. That is splendid.
Revolutionary.
Although it's a little weird, because when I think of a stylus, I've always thought of it as a pen. So to think of it as a pencil, is like erasable. I don't know. It's turned my head upside down. The name is ridiculous, and I accidentally got the price right. I think it's $100. It's insane. To me, that's insane for something I'm going to lose, right?
Right.
I lose pencils all the time.
$100 pencil, like that
Yep.
is the key phrase for me that I have. Like I get stuck on. Like I get it, right? This is a piece of technology. It has touch sensors and stuff inside of it. It probably doesn't cost $100 to make. It probably doesn't cost $50 to make, but it probably costs something more than like $3 or 50 cents or whatever pencil costs to make, right?
Sure. Some of the stuff they talked about did seem really interesting, like sensors that triangulate the angle that you're holding it at compared to the tablet. It's like, okay, so I'm going to buy into a little bit of their marketing drivel because it really does seem like an artist's tool.
Right. Well, that's the thing. That's the comparison here is a Wacom tablet or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And if they got that right, and generally Apple has done well to catering to artsy types, right? They've usually done a good job with that. If they got that right, then it'd be a very useful device for drawing, sketching, digital painting, creation of images using that. So, and you can expect if it's a professional tool that it's going to be priced like a professional tool, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, I get it. It's just, it's still $100 pencil in some worlds. Like, I just have a hard time.
Some people pay a lot more.
But yeah, I thought, well, what else is interesting about the Pro, guys?
Not a whole lot that isn't already interesting about like the iPad Air 2 with putting apps side by side. That's coming in iOS 9 for the Air 2, and hopefully, I don't know, if another tablet comes out with more than a gig of RAM, hopefully that'll spread out across the line. That's more interesting than the device itself, though, to me. Being able to move stuff between apps with them together.
Yeah, they had some demos with
the RAM for this, did they?
They showed multitasking.
Okay.
That's actually one of the issues with some of the Apple stuff. Is that the most burning question is how much RAM is in it for a lot of us, because like the new iPhones, the iPad Mini 4, I want all of them to have 2 gigs. My biggest beef with the iPhone 6 Plus, which I use every day, and which I reviewed and I wrote about when I reviewed and did a little video, is the task switching, because apps get ejected from memory very easily. You can only have a few active at once, depending on the apps, maybe less than that, and then the app reloads when you switch back to it, and it's no good, right? I mean, it's not a great experience, and it's not terrible because they load pretty quickly usually, but it would be better with more memory. And so I think that in order to do multitasking with iOS 9, you kind of have to have 2 gigs. That seems to be the word. If that's true, then I think we expect the Pro to have 2 gigs of memory. I think we expect the iPad Mini 4 to have 2 gigs of memory as well, because they demoed multitasking on it. We don't know about the new iPhone 6s and 6s Plus. And I asked Apple today about that, and I have not gotten an answer yet. You know, they don't always divulge specs, and if they don't do it as part of their public stuff, I'm not sure that we'll get an answer. But I'm pretty sure once anybody gets a hold of one, it'll be easy to tell. So, yeah. And I did write. There is a thread. I did write a story about just what is in the A9X and the A9 chips, because Apple made some big claims about basically almost double the CPU performance, essentially double the GPU performance compared to the A8 and A8X, which were some of the fastest mobile SoCs you could buy.
They were like some of the fastest, but from the A7 to the A8 wasn't a huge jump, right? So, you know.
This is an S.
Yeah.
And usually the S is like they keep the same design and they boost performance. And it appears they followed that this time. That they kept the same basic, like the phones look the same. The iPad Mini is a little different, but it looks very similar. But they are claiming around double the performance. And there's a lot that goes into that. The A8X is triple core CPU. The A9X might be. The A8 is dual, and the A9 might be.
Mm-hmm.
If they kept the same core counts and they're not counting additional performance out of more cores, then, which I hope is the case, then what we're looking at is a lot of per core performance gains. And they did mention a new transistor structure, which is almost certainly FinFETs, which means they're almost certainly moving to 14 or 16 nanometers, and that means probably quite a bit of additional goodness, because FinFET transistor structures let them run at lower voltages, and you can convert that right back into more power, right? You can run at higher frequencies, spend more time resident there, all of that stuff when you get lower power operations. So a big chunk of the 70, 80, whatever percent increases that they're citing could have come from that, and then the rest would have to come from like enhancements to the CPU core that increase per core performance. So we kind of have to wait and see. I think when people get their hands on things, it'll be easy to tell the core count and the amount of memory, and we'll probably be able to say, and clock speeds. Like you can at least get basic clock speeds, I think, out of some utilities, right? So we'll probably be able to do a fair amount. There will be teardowns too. That's the other thing, is you got to expect the teardowns. People are going to take that chip and X-ray it and do things like that with it. Apple's not always going to tell us what they're doing, but at least some of that stuff you can figure out eventually. It kind of, now that game has to play itself out.
It's hard though, because yeah, I really am hopeful for more RAM on the phone because I'm kind of like you. I got an iPhone 6, and if it's something where, every time I switch tabs in Safari, if it's not having to reload the tab, that directly translates into time saved for me, and so I balance it out. Okay,
Yeah.
so do I upgrade early? I don't know. I'd like to find out.
Yeah, let's look at okay. So speaking of the performance claims, and I totally agree. Like the RAM on the phones is a big deal, and I'm hoping that they've fixed that. Let's look at one other aspect of the performance claims, is that they said that the A9X is faster than 80 to 90% of the mobile PCs shipped in the past year.
Wow.
And yeah, they made a similar claim for the A9, I think, as well, and that sounds very impressive. I think the key question that on everybody's mind is, what is Apple's basis of comparison, and are they saying they're faster than Core M, Core i3 based Intel products, or are they just counting things based on like Bay Trail Atoms and maybe Chromebooks? Right?
Yeah, I guess you got to throw Chromebooks in, and that would include a whole bunch of them with ARM chips.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, maybe they're faster than those. But if we don't think too hard about it and don't read into it at all, and just let Apple's words stand on their own, which is dangerous, then they're saying that the A9 and the A9X are faster than some of their Macs, right? Because that would put them above the MacBook with a Core M.
Potentially. And that's the thing that's really interesting here is, Intel has kind of been the top dog on the CPU front for a long time. And some of that is architecture, and some of that is process technology. But some of it is having all the money. But it turns out that Apple has more money.
More of all the money.
Like, by a lot. And, if they decided to take some little slice of their many billions of dollars and fund the development of a CPU that outclasses an Intel Core M or Core i5, mobile chip, then wow. And I think that's a fascinating thing about this is clearly that's the trajectory that they are on. And the other sort of related question here is they released the MacBook bin, and it's about the size of the iPad, and now the iPad gets a keyboard and a stylus for precision input. It starts to look like they're almost competing with themselves. What is the long-term future for macOS? Does iOS become the thing, and the macOS becomes more sort of just like a workstation relegated to like technical computing type of thing?
I don't know. I guess if you think about what consumers do with their PCs, a lot of consumers do with their PCs, there might be, editing videos, and they made a big deal about editing multiple 4K streams on the iPad Pro. They're checking email, and they're doing, the web, Facebook,
all the personal and corporate productivity stuff that isn't like CAD and like high-end workstation
So a lot of
stuff.
people, you might be onto something. A lot of people might just get by on an iOS computer.
And well, I think it was Paul Thurrott, who's kind of the Microsoft follower guy, who was talking about. He was watching this, and he's been watching Surface obviously very closely, and so he was the one sort of floating some of these ideas. He was saying iOS isn't ready yet to make that transition to being the main thing, and kind of taking over that from the Mac OS for consumers, but it could be in several generations. And there has been this weird question we've kind of been wondering about is, how does Apple deal with the apparent convergence of mobile PCs and tablets and phones as a thing that's happening? And there's got to be a future where either the Mac OS and iOS like merge, or one of them kind of takes over, you would think, for like most stuff, instead of having a split like they do now. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about that. But this is a strong play, and it sends things in a different direction. So